Let's talk about factoring by grouping. Factoring by grouping is used when the polynomial has 4 terms. So let's lay some ground rules. Let's have our steps. First, we're going to split the terms into groups of 2, where each group has a GCF. And remember, GCF is greatest common factor. Typically, our students do first 2, last 2, so they split it down the center. And that will work in most cases, but not always. Okay. After you split it, so after we've divided it into 2 groups, you're going to factor out the GCF from each group. If the 2 factor parentheses, remember after we take out our GCF, we open a parenthesis. If those parentheses are the same on either side, they wind up being a GCF. It's a GCF within a GCF. It's like the inception of factoring. And then we need to factor out the GCF parentheses. And I know this sounds a little weird. Let's do an example. It always gets better after we do some examples. These steps are to help you when you try to do the work on your own. You're like, ah, crud, what do I do next? Go back to these steps. All right, so example where we need to factor, again, not just find the GCF, we need to factor y cubed plus 6y squared plus 4y plus 24. We need to divide it into 2 groups of 2. And typically, students break it up. First 2, last 2. Okay. So I am going ahead and write that again. If you don't want to, you don't have to, but I'm going to make it official where we are splitting them. I'm going to carry my sign on that 4th term. Okay, so I'm carrying my plus with it. If I'm looking at just the left side, so right now, all we are looking at is the left side. Y cubed plus 6y squared. Our smallest number is a 1, which will go into 6, but it's not interesting. So our GCF number would be a 1, but notice that they both have a y, which means our GCF is going to have a y, and the smallest exponent is a 2. So everybody can give a y squared. Now I am going to show the next step where I'm showing the additional work. If you are at the point where you can skip this step, that's fine. But if you're not comfortable with it, remember that we are taking each of our original terms and dividing by our GCF. And if we are taking out our GCF, we need some parentheses open. And we're going to put our division answer inside the parentheses. So y cubed over y squared, 3 minus 2 gets us 1, so y to the first. Bring down our plus. 6 divided by 1 is 6, and then my y squareds cancel. Remember, if you don't want to write y to the first, you can just write y. That's the same thing. Okay. Let's look at the other side. Let's look at the right-hand side. We're done with the Montagues. Let's look at the Capulets. So now we're over on the right-hand side. We're ignoring the Montagues on the left, and we're going to see what our terms have in common. Our smallest number is a 4, and 24 is divisible by 4, so we know our GCF is going to include a 4. My 24 does not have a y, which means I cannot include a y in my GCF. Now that I've found my GCF, I'm going to divide each of my original terms by that 4, the GCF. And since I'm dividing by 4, 4 comes out, and it's a positive 4. So I'm going to put a plus, open up my parentheses. 4y over 4, my 4's are going to cancel. 4 divided by 4 is 1. So I have 1y, or y, bring down my plus. 24 divided by 4 is 6. Now we're not done because we still have this plus hanging out in between. Factored form is when you have parentheses all multiplied together or a bunch of terms all multiplied together. But if you notice, what shows up on both sides of our wall? What's happening over on the Montague side? Y plus 6. What's happening on the Capulet side? Y plus 6. Romeo and Juliet, Romeo and Juliet. They're showing up in both, which means that they get factored out. They are the new GCF that's going to bring everyone together. So my y plus 6 is going to be factored out. And then what's going to be left? When we factored out the y plus 6 on the Montague side, the left-hand side, the only thing left was y squared. On the Capulet side, the right-hand side, when we took away the y plus 6, we had plus 4. So it's when we take Romeo and Juliet out, the y plus 6, that the Montagues and the Capulets finally come together. If you were wanting to double check your answer, you would FOIL this back out. First, outer, inner, last. And you should get back to the original. Keep in mind that your answer may be flip-flopped. You could also write this as y squared plus 4 times y plus 6. They are the same thing. Does not matter which order you include them, as long as you have both of the factors. So this is an or, one or the other. Let's try another one. We have yb minus 7y minus 10b plus 70. So let's go ahead and try to do the split again, first and last. So first two, last two. I'm going to rewrite my terms down here and make my wall concrete. So yb minus 7y, wall, and negative 10b plus 70. Looking on the left-hand side with the Montagues, they do not have a number in common, but a y shows up in both terms. When I'm factoring this out, and remember you can skip this step if you're starting to get the visual, we are going to be dividing out our GCF of y. And since we're taking out our GCF, we open up a new set of parentheses. YB over y, y's are going to cancel out to get b, carry down my negative. Y's are going to cancel on my 7y. So in the parentheses, I have b minus 7. Let's look at the right-hand side, back with the Capulets. If we're looking at the smallest number, we have a 10. 10 divides 10, cool. 70 is also divisible by 10, so we know we are going to have a GCF of 10, but notice that our first term is negative. You never want to start off with a negative first impression, so we're going to take the negative out with the GCF. Negative 10. We're not going to include a b because the 70 doesn't have a b to contribute. He cannot share one with you because he doesn't have one. So we're going to factor out our GCF of -10, which means that we are dividing each of our original terms by -10, which means that -10 is going to come outside of some parentheses. Let's do the division. -10 divided by -10 gets us 1, and then our b, or you can just write it as b if you want. It's the same thing. Positive 70 divided by -10 gets us a -7. We're not done yet because the Montagues and Capulets haven't come together to coexist. We're not in completely factored form yet. There's still the minus there in between them and the wall. But if you notice, Romeo and Juliet did get together on both sides. We have b minus 7, which means that the b minus 7 is going to factor out. Since we're factoring out, open up the second parenthesis. We got to see what's left of their families after we take them out of the equation. So the b minus 7 came out front, which means the y is stuck inside the second parenthesis. And then we have the minus 10. And remember that your answer could also be y minus 10 times b minus 7. Either one of these is fine. Remember, the order doesn't matter, but the signs do. So you cannot have 10 minus y. You can't have 7 minus b because both the b and the y were positive while the numbers were negative.